the multi-minded maniac wizard, has all kinds of kids begging him to perform magic, like pick which hand, and when he opens it, he uses the other hand to press the button on his spine, allowing miniature fireworks to go off above the chosen hand. He lives in the trunk of a rusted abandoned car lost deep in the forest. So far in the future there's not even a date. All the kids ran screaming in disbelief, all except a young big-eyed girl. "Are you really a magician?" He was expressingly appalled. "Young lady, I make my own magic, thank you. Magicians come to me to purchase my inventions. I am one of the 5 wizards of the world." Her eyes were just as big, but gave no indication she was impressed. No indication, no indication she was even breathing. The more he looked at her, "I don't have time for this." Beyond disbelief, beyond disbelief, she watched a ghost run out of him and run to the rusty car before gaining color and opening it. It became a long-haired child, no doubt, who didn't seem to pay them any attention. She closed her jaw, turning back to the trickster. What was right then she was interrupted by a tall lady in a beautiful dress and another muscular man with long blonde mustache down to his chin. They both faded to a ghost-like state, then ran into the unaffected wizard. Her eyes were so big she probably couldn't open her mouth, pulling all her skin to the back of her head. During this time, he had begun rummaging through the endless pockets, muttering to himself, all the way down the torch-lit stairwell inside the car trunk. She was right behind him, not saying a word. Where did that run off to? Why does everything a wizard owns seem to take on a life of its own? He headed straight for the desk near a bookshelf right at the door, when the first ghost boy had walked up to him and said, "Could it be because wizards always have their hands in everything all the time?" He was holding a small box with a stupid, "When are you going to notice?" the look on his with a how are you going to notice the look on his face. The wizard turned. "Ah, yes, there it is." Holding his palm up, the boy faded back into a ghost and disappeared back inside, only leaving the package on the palm. He went right to work on it, first flipping through a stack of parchment with circles drawn on it. The worst part about it is, I have no say who comes out next. It tends to be a real bother when I'm in a bad way. She watched the box open, and a beautiful light streamed out of it. He gently scooped it up with 2 fingers, cupped his hands a bit, and placed it in one of the countless satchels and pouches he had all over himself. He wasn't an old man. His beard was barely long enough to wrap a ribbon, so to keep it in line. He always wore mismatched clothing. Even his socks were wishy-washy, all but his leather-soled shoes. They were always polished and neat. This was why the children began heckling him. His outfit always looked tattered and torn, like he's been lost in the forest for years. But his shoes appeared to have never been off the shelf of the shoemaker. "Good, yes." Turning, realized she was still there. "Oh my, what are you still doing here? Don't you have somewhere to go or to do something?" She shook her head silently, never taking her eyes off him. "Okay, fine, I'll take you home myself." "Ee, ee, ee, ee." He squeaked towards the door, as two squirrels ran in. They squeaked back and forth to themselves until one slowly crept over to the child and sniffed. Now, little girl, regardless of what happens, here, remember, these are not your friends. These are wild animals, and may try to bite you if I'm not around. I'm sure you can't even tell these two apart from any other. She was stumped. She'd never thought of it before. It's not like they're cats. He was right. Who could ever tell the difference between a squirrel? Right then, patting around two of the sacks on his belt near his chest. Ah, yes, here we go. He took out a pinch of something and paused. Um, how far do you live from here, little one? Not very far, a mile or so. He stroked his beard, thinking, putting the pinch back in, and headed towards another one. He took out a new pinch and sprinkled it over both of the squirrels. She watched them begin to grow bigger, bigger than a dog, but smaller than a horse. Sorry, my lady, but squirrels don't care much for harnesses, so hop on. She heard the words, but it was preposterous. Didn't you just tell me? Up she went. He was much stronger than he looked. As he climbed up, a blue jay flew in up to his ear, chirping. Oh my, you don't say. I most certainly will. As fast as the bird flew out, two new kids jumped out at him and began rummaging through the things on it still needed playing. Still horse began rummaging through things, and the two kids were still horse playing. The squirrels were so fast and agile, the young girl nearly fell off more than once. The wizard pulled out a flute and began playing it. The squirrel he was riding had its own ghost. This ghost squirrel came out and was being rode by another one of his, an old man with a shaggy short beard. They broke off without a glance and disappeared in the darkness off in the forest before color returned to them. The wizard has 13 different personality constructs. They go ahead of him to prepare what he needs done without interrupting what he's in the middle of. Each of the personalities are completely different, from noble to treacherous, conceited. He even has one who's a better wizard than he is, though he'd never admit it. But you can tell from the man that it's eagerly conceited. Those two are the worst. Neither will do what they're told unless there's something worth their expertise. This is exceedingly bad for a wizard. He can do most things without the attitude. He only needs them for running errands and other measly stuff like that. Now, the book, on the other hand, if he didn't need it, he would spend a lot of time attempting to find the most horrible way to end it. Something bad, something the book considered forbidden. You see, it has a little man complex, with the idea that it's the boss. It screams at him like he's some sort of drill sergeant, as if he didn't go through that enough the 15 years he was an apprentice. The multi-minded maniac wizard did as much as he could, trying to make it so that he never needed to unstrap that thing from his back, trying to build an arsenal with such a large range that allowed him to do anything. But the world is more complex than the number of named things. The world has layers, up and down, forward and way back to the ancient times, so far in the future and still, from the dark void of the forgotten, make their way to the light. When I was an apprentice, I had that thought that these come out because wizards did exist. My master called me a fool, saying, as the sands of time swarm, everything will be unveiled. He dropped the girl off and rode the squirrel through the tree line before returning it to their natural state. He had bothered them for long enough, and with company. Time was of the essence. The blue jay from earlier had made him aware that a phoenix had begun running amok. This is very much outside of Phoenix's usual persona. Humans had found many uses for their hides, and they prefer to remain as if they don't exist. He pulled out his hourglass, then looked for the sun. It's still a bit early, but it's my only choice. It'll save me from multiple spells when I might not have time to begin with. Ooh, 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 ooh. It wasn't long before the great owl landed next to him. It stood 4 foot off the ground and reached in that first pouch and took a pinch out and sprinkled it on himself. As he leaped towards the huge bird, he shrank. The owl became bigger than a horse from his eyes' point of view. Go, my friend. We have quite a distance to go. They soared high above the trees when a ghost with wings shot out of him to the remaining personalities that were still collecting the things from his home. The one that rode ahead on the squirrel was busily stringing up tripwires. Why, you ask? A phoenix doesn't like to fly above the treetops where the human eyes often stray. A phoenix can see 100 times better than a human, so it can easily slip around one even if it's using a telescope. The ghost boys arrived being carried on strings by the winged man with long white hair. They patiently waited in line, allowing the wizard to strap each of the pieces they brought for the shaggy beard man's tripwires. When he arrived, the owl waited patiently. Owls have been allies to wizards for as long as there have been wizards, and as, not having a spell put on him, he was more than willing to help. Have you ever been expected to hold something in an awkward angle? You can't help but get aggravated. The wizard began enchanting a spell to erase foreign things in this area. He did his big, bold arm gestures while speaking the old words. The book vibrated maliciously on his back. It hated when it wasn't unstrapped for this part. He used the bric-a-brac pieces as fake people. Giving the bric-a-brac fake people, giving it lives for a few minutes, allowing a roundabout opening for the phoenix to get snared in here. The wizard couldn't be seen by the bird, or it would vanish, elaborating its evaporating itself anywhere. No, we wait. He shrunk back down and erected a javelin. The phoenix would know instantly that it entered magic, and the only thing it hates more than humans are magic casters. He would have to protect himself as he tried to find what's wrong with this erratic bird. As the time came, he heard the squeal in the bird's throat. It was in pain. He darted off the owl, growing back to his regular size with the second pouch, and using the multi-clone spell to help him climb up on the back of the high tree near the magic boundary that it was headed. As he reached the top, the replicas of him faded away. He sat there quietly, pulling out a pair of liquid-filled goggles. He would need as much time as he could, and the goggles would slow the mythical creature down enough to assess the problem. Luckily he did, because as the bird entered, it erratically tried to turn around. The tripwires were on him, and the boxes were now filled with the wings and feet, although the boxes were still in the center of the magic border. Not after being able to find anything wrong, he drew his attention to the boxes. One of the wings had a talisman on it. He pulled out a loop full of emblems and began putting them over it one after another, attempting to see what kind of spell is attached to it. As the bell emblem passed over, it began to chime. Turns out it's a locator tracker beacon. He broke the talisman and watched the grateful bird soar away. He cleaned up his equipment, lowered the barrier, and began to walk home. The owner of the talisman was not pleased. He needed that bird's blood to save his dying father. It was his last hope, and took years to find one. It nearly got away, but he was prepared for everything. As soon as the talisman broke, the wristband around his arm burst into flames. Him and his minions quickened their pace. Their horses' stomps shook the ground. The nearby villages could swear they could hear the horses' breath. Everyone locked up tight and hid for their lives. Not many can capture a wizard, but he needed to let them in order to see why. They beat him until they were tired, and their campfire was burnt down to cinders. It took 4 tries to summon the right personality. He needed the bound girl. She walked out, turned to the same position he was facing, and as she gained her color where he was standing, he began losing color until he was fully free, in which she returned to see through afterwards and returning back inside him. Then, without moving, sending his replicator clones to climb out past their hearing area, not like he would make any noise anyway, and a few dull weapons, which he did with weapon control. He had used a few of the clones to dull the weapons that they had with weapon control. Put on his camouflage cloak, set road traps, placed 7 paper-thin roll-out mirrors at various spots, and set TNT with several different sized fuses. But before he lit them, he lit a candle, and using the flame to start making a dog shadow puppet. Go, boy, tell me where they're coming from. Then he made an elephant for strong reinforcements, and a monster to see which of them would run away. He crept down next to the black elephant. It's time. The dog's tail dropped and pointed in the direction that they were headed in. He lit the fuses. Out of the band of 8, 3 ran, 4 got blown away, knocked out, and he used the rope track to catch the leader. The wizard walked up to the angry man, who was hanging upside down by the foot. Are you done? Then take me to your father. The wizard snapped his fingers, and the rope loop came undone. When he got there, he realized how right his son was. Age is a terrible thing. But he had an idea. He reached in his pocket and pulled out his messenger bird egg that opens with a coin inside of a bird. And when it's spun between his thumb and index fingers, it releases a messenger bird. The coin burst into wings and landed on his forearm. He whispered into its ear and then released it into the air. In the meantime, using his crushing bowl, mixed 2 different herb remedies, one for the pain relief and another to be added to his idea. As the bird returned with a vial, he put the liquid goggles back on to be sure about his diagnosis. He pulled them up to his forehead, opened his shirt, and rubbed the contents of the vial and herbs all over his chest above his lungs. "Hold up your father." He faced the dying man, slammed his palms together, rubbed them till warm, and thrust them into the old man's chest. Light seared all their eyes, and the vile contents on his chest burst into blue flames. "Come on, come on," he kept whispering to himself, when swoosh, the blue shot a blast of purple before fading to nothing. Then slowly took his hands and stumbled back to the nearby chair. He patted his forehead and passed out. When he awoke, there was a strong fire with extra kindling wood and a great meal waiting for him to enjoy. They were long gone. He even noticed they collected all of his equipment. It was a good meal.